Welcome to another edition of the Fieldhouse Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vecenie. I'm here with managing editor of the Fieldhouse, Seth Davis. We're going to talk about everything bracket in this episode, from the selection show, which Seth was a part of, obviously on TBS, to who our national champions are when the Nets are cut down in San Antonio in the first week of April. Seth, how's it going, man?
Going great. I'm down here in the Turner studio, a little first four action tonight, studying up on the LIU Blackbirds and looking forward to what's next.
Still in Atlanta or up in New York studio?
No, I'm down in Atlanta, so I'll be here all week. We got the first fours on True TV, and then Thursday we're off and running.
There we go. So you were obviously a part of the selection show, which it got a lot of crap on Twitter, as everything tends to do on Twitter. I figure I will give you. Sure. I figure I'll give you a chance to talk about the selection show and what you enjoyed being a part of with it.
Well, it's a very exciting thing. I mean, and for me, it's really my most exciting thing of the year. I mean, as much as I love, obviously, the Final Four, but you know, all the other times that I'm on TV, I am talking about the games. I am commenting on the action. For the selection show, we are the action. And so that's very adrenaline pumping. It's fun, you know, getting, I think I got a bracket right about 5 o'clock maybe, so a good hour beforehand, which is kind of early by historic standards. So just knowing the bracket, like, you know, knowing an hour before everybody else that Syracuse was in and that was going to be a big deal, was pretty cool. And listen, it was definitely different. You know, Turner is very aggressive about putting its stamp on things. They're not afraid to shake things up. They're not afraid to do things differently. And you know, following the action on Twitter, I saw it wasn't, you know, so well received. But you know, I think once we got into the bracketing of it, I'll say this, and I ask you this question. I think people were pleasantly surprised that we didn't drag it out. Like, they heard 2-hour selection show and why are you going to make us wait so long? Like, I think we got through the last bracket right about the same time that we would have if it were on CBS. So at the very least, we certainly weren't dragging things out.
Yeah, it was done within the first 35, 40 minutes, something like that. I think it took 12 or 13 minutes to get through the at-large alphabetical selections, and then you got into the bracketing process, and that buzzed by, I would say, right?
Well, here's what I'll say. You know, and obviously, like, no one's asking my opinion around here about what to do, which is
don't get fired, Seth.
Frankly. No. You know, it's funny, Sam. It's like, you know, a couple of years ago when we did a 2-hour show and they really wanted to drag it out. That was the year the bracket got leaked. You know, people were complaining that we were dragging it out. And so now it's, you're getting rid of the suspense, you know, by doing the reveal early. I mean, I would say it was probably maybe a mistake to do not necessarily showing the automatic qualifiers, but maybe going through that team by team, because that's the thing that everybody already knew. So it seemed to me that, you know, maybe you could have put up all the automatic qualifiers and just kind of talked about a couple of them instead of going through it team by team. But I thought, you know, having the reveal of the at-larges and all that, I mean, it was definitely different, and you know, you learned something very salient early on in the show. So you didn't tell. Why don't you tell me? You're kind of dancing around with it. Tell me exactly what you didn't like about it.
I thought that it was redundant to do the at-larges and then the bracketing. Right. When you do the bracketing, you're going to find out who the at-larges are anyway throughout the bracketing. Right. So
is there a sense as a fan or a viewer that maybe you want to know this information earlier, or you like being teased? You like the suspense of it?
I think that it takes away a bit of suspense. Yeah. Like, you know, immediately that Arizona State is in, right? You know, immediately that Baylor is out. Whereas whenever you're in, let's say, past years, maybe 4 years ago, whenever we were doing it that way, you got down to that 30-minute mark, and Baylor, I mean, still had a chance to be in the tournament. But by the time, or even before the first commercial break, we knew that Baylor was out of the tournament. You know what I mean? It kind of robbed that sense of suspense, I think.
Yeah, that's the rub. That's the rub. I mean, on the one hand, like I said, you're doing something different. And it was just being on TBS was different. So I feel like I said, they want to put their stamp on it. I mean, it's one of the nicest studios I've ever been in, the biggest studio I'd ever worked in, and I actually thought having a live audience there was pretty cool. I mean, I just think it made it kind of fun, and they were not. I don't know if they were going to be disruptive at all, and I felt like, especially for Kenny and Charles in particular, are such a great performer, that for him to have an audience there, I thought brought out the best in him. So I actually thought that part of it was kind of cool.
Can we talk real quick about Charles, too? He was the best on the selection show, and I'm sorry, Seth, but Chuck did an awesome job grilling Bruce Rasmussen after some of the selections. I thought that, I'm someone who's like, okay, like, I get why Charles is there, but, I sometimes wish that we didn't emphasize him as much. I was ecstatic that his role was emphasized this year because he just gave no crap. He was just like, we're going for it. We're gonna grill this dude, and we're gonna go from there.
That's Charles, man. I mean, that was kind of running joke. I used to work with Reggie Miller a lot, and Charles would go off and say his things, and Reggie would always say, remember, he can say that and we can't. I mean, can you imagine if I went after the chair like that? Like, that would not go over well with a lot of people, and it would not be consistent with my brand, much as I hate to use that word brand. That's the best. Like people who don't like, Kenny and Charles on the tournament. Like, frankly, I just don't get it. I mean, they are not pretending to know things they don't know.
Right.
Everybody knows that they don't follow college basketball the way that Clark and I do. So they're not trying to pretend otherwise. They're two of the best players who ever played. And
they're hilarious.
Charles, yeah, they're great players. And I'm sure you feel the same way. Like, I always want the opinions of great players because they see things and react to things that the rest of us mere mortals. So I've always really, really valued the opinions of former players. They don't have to know, the seventh guy off the bench for Kansas to know what to think about Kansas. And in Charles's case, he's such an amazing broadcaster and performer. He's 100% honest all the time. He don't care. He just don't care. So I love. First of all, he's a really, he's a beautiful guy. He's got a huge heart. He's got a big loving heart. He loves everybody. Loves what he does. He brightens up a room. He makes everybody feel a part of the gang, and he's exceptionally intelligent and really, and just he go say what he thinks, and that makes for great television.
Yeah, no, I mean, like there are times where it'll frustrate me, but then I'm just like, okay, whatever. Charles is funny. Just put him on TV. Just get him on TV whenever you can. He's hilarious.
He's hilarious, and he knows basketball. Like
yeah.
When he's commenting when he comes on at halftime and he's watched the first half of a game, he's going to come up with something really smart to say. And you whether or not you're going to agree with him, Sam, you want to know what Charles Barkley thinks of that first half.
I do. Yeah, no, that's definitely true. You mentioned Syracuse, so let's kind of get into the actual bracketing process and get into the snubs, the teams you were surprised got in, right? So Syracuse and Arizona State, I think, are probably the two biggest, questionable teams, we'll say, that got into the NCAA tournament. Were you surprised that both of those teams got in? Were you surprised that one of those teams got in? Where do you stand on the teams that were selected?
Well, I was more surprised at Syracuse because I just didn't think they had the quality wins. But here's the thing: like I think Stuart Mandel, our bracket guy at the Fieldhouse, I want to say he had. I know they were in his first four out.
Yeah,
they may have been his second or third team out. So how outraged can you really be? Right? It's not like they came out of nowhere. I mean, they were in everybody's first four out. So was I surprised? Yeah, that I think they were in, but I had them as my second team out, and I slid Arizona State into my first team out once Davidson beat Rhode Island. But you know what, Sam? I didn't spend 5 days looking at it. Like I don't know that I spent more than 5 minutes on a particular team at that point of the day. Like I call up their page on Jerry Palm's site, and I look at their RPI, and I just get a feel for what I think should happen. So it's funny. I saw Jim Boeheim saying I didn't think we were close, which is kind of hilarious. But it's really funny is if you remember, I'm sure you do. They played Clemson at home, and Gabe DeVoe throws up a 3-pointer at the end of regulation that almost went in. And if that had gone in, Clemson could have maybe won that game in overtime, and Syracuse would be out. So that oftentimes is the difference between making it or not making it. What were you outraged by Syracuse?
I was I guess like I'm not outraged by Syracuse in particular. I am a little bit outraged about Syracuse over USC. Like if I'm like comparing to a specific team, I don't really understand how you can put Syracuse in over USC. I guess that the way that the committee kind of rationalized it was they said that Syracuse had more wins over quality opponents, but you go through Syracuse's schedule. I mean, they beat Virginia Tech, they beat Miami and Clemson, and then Buffalo as well. They beat 4 teams that are in the NCAA tournament. I think USC only beat 2, but you look at just about every other metric. You look at, I think even quad 1 wins, quad 2 wins, road and neutral wins. USC was better from a resume perspective, and just on the floor. When you watch the 2 teams play, it's pretty clear to me that USC is a better team. But that was the one. I mean, like some people complained about St. Mary's. I would have liked to see St. Mary's in, but they were playing poorly at the end of the season. And I know that's not really a metric they use anymore, but I'm not sure that I'm particularly outraged that that team isn't in despite their 28-5 record. I don't know that I'm outraged that Middle Tennessee isn't in, even though I would like to see them get a chance against some of the great teams. I would say that USC is probably the one.
I think I had USC in. To me, I like Randy Bennett, and I think he's a really good coach. If you want a quality program, you got to go out and play people, and don't complain to me that they're not going to come back to your. They're not going to come. They're not going to play on your home floor. You got to find road games, and you got to play on the road, and then you got to make sure that you're not finding. I mean, they played a ton. A lot of them were in the league, but I've often said with respect to all this RPI stuff, Sam, that a win over a highly ranked team may not help you as much as playing a lot of games against really low ranked teams will hurt you. And they've got a lot of really low ranked teams in that league. You've got to play outside the conference. And if you're in the West Coast Conference, a non-conference strength of schedule of 162 is not going to cut it. And I don't get it. Like with this team, He should have had the number one. He should have played everybody anywhere, taken the show on the road. Whoever, don't even bother returning. We're going to come to your gym and we're gonna have us a show.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at what they could have done.
Do that. I just don't get. He's never done it.
Yeah, like you look at what they could have done too. I mean, your pseudo colleagues, my former colleagues at CBS Sports, both Gary Parrish and Matt Norlander, reported that, they had a potential home and home against Rhode Island that they didn't want to do. They had a potential home and home against Nevada that they didn't want to do. They bought out a game against Grand Canyon, who ended up being a pretty solid team. I do think there's something to be said for the fact that, the Wooden Legacy event that they were a part of, the strength of that event was warped. It was much, much worse than it typically is due to the presence of the PK80. Cal had its worst year in decades, and they went to Cal and played on the road. That's a game you can typically count on. And then Dayton, they had a home and home against Dayton, scheduled, I think, 2 years ago. And Archie Miller leaves Dayton, and that program ends up having a rebuilding year because of that. So I think there are questions on both sides of the spectrum there in terms of why he feels he did enough, and also why, he could have gone out and been more aggressive. I tend to fall more on your side of the argument, but I do think it's worth kind of giving the other side of the case too.
Yeah, but this has been the case for several years now, and St. Mary's has really been on the cusp of being like a Gonzaga as a mid-major out of that conference, and I think it falls directly on Randy Bennett's shoulders that they haven't taken that step.
Yeah, I don't think that's an unfair sentiment. The USC one is bizarre to me. I have no real reasoning why that team would not be in the NCAA tournament. I get the conference record is not a full-on used metric by the committee, but I mean, there's something to be said for the fact that USC finished second in that league, second in the conference tournament, and Arizona State finished ninth in that league, ninth in the conference tournament. It's the Arizona State team just not playing well and hasn't played well since the beginning of December, really. So that's another one that's hard for me to get by, but I at least understand why they're in.
Yeah, I get it. So how about all of us picking Nova and Virginia?
Yeah.
All the comments on the brackets were like, I didn't pay to subscribe to this site, so everyone picks the same file. It's kind of funny how we all wimped out on that.
I really thought that I was going to be different by picking Virginia. I thought that everyone would pick Duke. Like I thought everyone except you, because you don't want to pick Duke because of your perceived bias toward Duke. But I would have guessed that most people would have picked Duke to get there. And to be honest, like Duke Villanova was a literal coin toss for me. I tossed a coin to say like, hey, which one of these two teams am I going to put in the final? Yeah, I'm pretty shocked by that. What was your immediate thought whenever you saw it?
People were, and I thought it was kind of fun. Listen, I mean, that's how people feel. I mean, the way I break it down is this. I think Villanova is the best team in the country. That's why I picked them.
Sure.
I think Virginia has had the best season, and I think Duke has the most talent.
Yep.
So, what's going to win out with that? And it's really been so interesting. We talked about this a lot, about Duke going to the zone. I mean, you realize they're now 7th in defensive efficiency? I mean, that is crazy. They went – I think they weren't they in the 70s at one point?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They might have even been lower than that at one point.
Yeah. So their Ken Pom profile looks like a national champion. So, to me, I just – it's hard for me to trust their youth, but they do strike me as a team that the longer they're in the tournament, the more dangerous they're going to be.
Well, here would be my counter, I guess, to Duke, right? Kansas is kind of a perfect team to play against the zone, right? Bill Self will have them ready to play against a 2-3 zone. They can knock down shots from the perimeter. They can shoot over the zone, and that's a pretty tough matchup. Then if they get to the Final Four, Villanova, same deal. One of the best shooting teams in the country. They're really going to be able to shoot over the zone. I think it's going to be tough for Duke because of those two matchups to get to the title game. Michigan State, I think they'll be okay against given the zone, given the fact that they already played Michigan State. We have a sample there that says they're better than Michigan State. Yeah, I mean, it's hard. That's a really, really tough one. I do agree with you. They're the most talented starting five in the country, but again, I think a lot of it comes down to how much do you trust Trayvon Duval? If you trust Trayvon Duval, they are definitely the most talented team. If you don't, then I think it gets a little bit more questionable with them.
Well, if that's what it comes down to, I don't know that I trust Trayvon, especially to make free throws. I mean, that's going to be a big time problem for them if he's got to be in the game. I actually think, I'm not sure I just agree with you about Kansas in the sense that, I mean, I think that to beat the zone, you've got to operate in the middle of the zone.
Right.
And I don't know who on Kansas, like the zone, the Jim Boeheim zone, which is of course what Krzyzewski runs and what everybody runs. It was interesting during this lecture about him talking about, I gather that Jeff Capel and Mike Hopkins have spent a lot of time talking about it and learning. And the zone is like, it's hard to play half zone, half man, because then like you're not good at either one. So to work on it all the time and really get into the intricacies on it. But, to me, the more interesting question would be Michigan State, because they do have a couple of guys who I think are, in terms of their skill set, are very capable of operating in the middle of the zone in Jaren Jackson and Miles Bridges. But to me, correct me if I'm wrong, I think Northwestern is the only Big Ten team that played zone consistently. So it's like if you're not used to playing against a zone, it's just a little bit uncomfortable. Can you think of any other Big Ten teams that play a lot of zone this year?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I don't really think so. Yeah,
up, right, but not.
Yeah, like Nebraska occasionally would play like a weird 1-3-1. The thing with Jaren Jackson though is too, Jaren Jackson's been very like sneaky turnover prone all year, so I'd be a little bit worried about him in the middle of the zone. So Kansas, we have sample of them playing two like heavy zone teams, right? They played Syracuse and Washington in back-to-back games. Syracuse in both games, LeGerald Vick was their guy who ran the middle of the zone. He was successful in both games, but the team wasn't all that successful in both games. The team beat Syracuse by 16 and then lost to Washington at home by 9. So we do have a mixed track record of Kansas against that zone. I just like the idea of them as a zone offense. I like the idea of them being able to play high-low with Vic and Udoka Azubuike and being able to kick it out to all of the shooters they have.
Yeah. Now we talked about this during the fast break. What do you think about Providence over North Carolina as a second round?
Providence, I would say, to be honest, is one of my blinder spots this year. Like, I've seen them like 3 or 4 times, but I can't really purport to be an expert on Providence basketball this year. I like the idea of that matchup. I like the idea of them with their heavy guard play with Kai Cartwright and their athletic wings and Alpha Diallo and Isaiah Jackson being able to kind of give them some problems. But I'm kind of just at the point where I trust Roy Williams to figure it out. Like the guy is just an unbelievable coach, and he gets very little credit for being as good of an in-game coach as he is.
Well, he's. I agree with you on that. To me, it's not even about like who's better or who's worse. It's about matchups, and I do think that Providence would be an uncomfortable matchup for North Carolina, because the first thing you got to be able to do is limit them in transition, and that means taking care of the basketball. That means you better have a really good point guard, and Cartwright is as good as any point guard in the country. And then stylistically. North Carolina, I don't know in terms of that physical toughness that Providence, would bring. So you slow them down, try to get them in a rock fight, try to punch them in the mouth, limit your turnovers, and you got a chance. So I wish I had the foresight early on to make that pick. When I get the bracket before the show, I take 5 minutes to fill it out, and that becomes my bracket for the whole tournament. But that's one upset that I'm calling out. And nobody's got Xavier in the Final Four. It's like Chris Mack has all the bulletin board material that he needs.
So yeah, the thing that scares me most about that is if you look at Chris Mack's record, like whenever he has 4 or 5 days to prepare, it's like ridiculous. He's like 13-2 or something insane like that. And that's I think it's even against the spread too. He just dominates teams whenever he has multiple days to prepare. And their toughest game throughout this entire run here is probably going to come against Gonzaga in the Sweet 16, and he's going to have a lot of days to prepare for that. I'm not disparaging Mark Few, but we have a track record now of Chris Mack being able to game plan and scheme for teams like this, and I thought a lot about that, and I just ultimately think Gonzaga is a better team, but man, Xavier scares me. Xavier having them out early scares me.
Yeah, well, it's he's kind of, I don't like to use the word overachieve, but he's done that with lower seeded teams. So now for him to be a 1 seed, I don't know if it's a different mentality or it just seems that every year. Usually Gonzaga is that 1 seed that nobody picks to go to the Final Four. So that'll be an interesting region out there in UCLA for sure. I've loved Michigan all season. I love their defensive toughness, and I pretty much knew, no matter what, that I was going to try to pick Michigan to go to the Final Four. And once I saw them opposite Xavier, to me, it became a no-brainer. Yeah,
Michigan, North Carolina is a really interesting matchup because North Carolina, despite their... Go ahead.
If it happens.
That's a really interesting matchup just because in a lot of ways, North Carolina is still, despite their lack of size, the team that crashes the offensive glass and tries to create extra possessions. Michigan this year has been one of the best defensive rebounding teams in the country. So I think Michigan actually presents a really tough matchup for North Carolina. I liked that a lot. I think that Michigan would get by North Carolina if North Carolina gets by Providence or I guess Texas A&M. I'm not real enthused by Texas A&M, but I guess that it's worth bringing up that Providence has to get by Texas A&M first.
It is very well worth that, and Texas A&M is not a team you want to believe in. And what do we think about the SEC in general? They obviously put a lot of teams in.
Yeah,
it feels to me that Auburn was really leaking oil down the stretch. I think losing McLemore, it took some time, kind of similar to maybe what's happened. I've noticed with Nevada and losing Lindsey Drew, that it takes a few weeks maybe for the real effect of not having somebody over a long period of time, and you wonder. But in Auburn's case, they already had very little size because they didn't have Wiley,
right?
And are we believing in Tennessee? I guess people would probably say Kentucky's got the best chance, but that means going through Arizona in the second round, and that's a hard one for them.
Yeah, Tennessee has one of Miami or Loyola Chicago in the second round, and that's not an easy matchup either. Auburn, I don't have a crazy amount of faith in, to be honest, and maybe that's just me underselling Auburn kind of all season, even though I've been the proponent of Bruce Pearl for National Coach of the Year for the entire website. They've lost 4 of 6 down the stretch. That's a scary proposition to me, especially whenever you consider the fact that that's basically right around when Anthony McLemore went out. That's a really, really tough thing for them because I think he really helped steady their defense in many ways. They are not a good 3-point defensive team. McLemore was the one kind of holding them down inside defensively. So, I think that, so I picked College of Charleston to beat them. The more I've thought about it since we had to fill out the bracket an hour after the bracket selection, I do think Auburn gets by them. And even then, they play Clemson or New Mexico State. Both those teams are relatively undersized too. I think Auburn can get by both of them. But once you get past that, it's hard to really feel a lot of confidence in them. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, I actually have New Mexico State in the Sweet 16. Part of it is because
I did too.
It's out in San Diego, right? Yeah. So you've got. I don't think Auburn and Clemson basketball fans are going to travel to San Diego for first round games. If they were playing football, it'd be no problem. So that and New Mexico State. I mean, I like your Loyola pick to go to the Sweet 16. I wish I had made that pick because I just like teams that win a lot, And I think with Loyola and New Mexico State, like they just won all year.
Yeah,
they're used to winning. I like Buffalo too, by the way. Again, I didn't pick them over Arizona, but that was the other team.
It's a tough matchup for them.
Tough matchup for them. Yeah, Arizona's a tough matchup for everybody right now.
Yeah.
Although I'll switch that gear. If we get Arizona, Virginia, I mean, I love that matchup for Virginia. Like, to me, if Arizona's guards can't drive, then their offense is a wash. And to watch. The idea that we could watch Tony Bennett's defense go up against DeAndre Ayton, they're so good at the way they double team and rotate and communicate. I mean, it really is. I think Virginia would be almost of all the teams in the tournament. I think Virginia is the worst possible matchup for a team like Arizona.
Yeah, it's really interesting because they both try and do similar things defensively, right? Like Sean Miller. He's tried to do the pack line defense that he typically likes this year. They don't really have the wing defense to be able to do that, but it's hard for him. I think Sean, being out in Vegas for a couple of days, it's been really hard for him with this team. Like the fact that he got them to a Pac-12 regular season championship outright and a Pac-12 tournament championship is totally remarkable, given just how I don't know if he feels a lot of confidence in the role players on that roster, we'll say.
I would agree. By the way, lousy league and only played UCLA and USC once. Yeah. So it's a little bit, I like Arizona a lot, but I've watched them a lot. Obviously you have too this year, and they have these great pieces, and it just never looks like all those pieces are working great together. That still may be good. It still may be good enough for them. But at a certain point, you've got to be, connected as a team, and where your whole is greater than the sum of your parts, even when you have great parts. And I think at the end of the day, that's where the rubber's going to hit the road for them.
Yeah, and the thing that scared me about them all year is the defense. You go back through what they've done recently; they've been at 1 point per possession or under in every single game where they've had their full complement of players over the course of the last 7. So take away that Oregon game where Sean Miller wasn't there. Take it away where who else missed that game? A player missed that game too.
Sure.
Trier missed that game. That's right.
Yeah.
So you take that away. They've been really solid defensively recently. We'll see if that sticks though, because that's a little bit scary to kind of trust them going forward. The SEC in general, getting back to the original question here, just because we kind of shifted there to talk about Kentucky. I have Florida, I have Arkansas, I have Kentucky in my Sweet 16. So I have 3 SEC teams in my Sweet 16. None of the 2 champions are in my Sweet 16, but I really like the Arkansas matchup against Purdue if that happens. I'm just fascinated by the fact that they are much, much more athletic than Purdue, and they have a big guy in Daniel Gafford that they can throw on Isaac Haas.
Yep, those are exactly the 2 points I made on the selection show. And I'm a big Purdue fan, but the matchups is what jumps out at you when you see these brackets. And we've been watching these teams all year, and for those exact 2 reasons. And I saw Purdue. I called 2 of their games courtside for Big Ten Network, and their lack of athleticism on the perimeter is pretty glaring. Yeah. Carson Edwards is definitely a bucket getter, but they get all their offense off of sets, and I think they can be bothered by good athletes. And by the way, not just good athletes on Arkansas, but older guys. Yep. Jalen Barford, and they got an upper class backcourt, and that kid Gafford is special.
Yeah.
And not only can he guard Isaac Haas one-on-one on the post, and at least bother him. Haas is obviously huge, and Haas will get his numbers, but you don't really have to double team if you don't want. But he can really, really outrun Haas down the floor.
Yeah.
And in up-tempo system, I think Arkansas could almost take Haas out of the game without double teaming between the style of play and if Gafford can stay out of foul trouble. So, that's one upset I got to pick. Throw one. This is probably the only time anyone's ever said this to you on a podcast. I have to go get makeup on. So throw one last question at me. Give me your best shot.
I love it. Let's just talk national champions and Final Fours, right? We do have Virginia, Villanova, both of us. Did you end up picking Duke into the Final Four?
I did. It was 2 coin flips for me. Michigan State over Kansas. I went with talent. So I got Virginia, Villanova, Duke, and Michigan in my Final Four, and then I have Villanova over Virginia in the same championship matchup that all 5 athletic full-time writers picked.
If one team is going to bust that Final Four and break into it, who is the team you trust most outside of those 4?
Gonzaga. It was close for me. I had them in the regional final, losing to Michigan. For some reason more so than North Carolina. I mean, I like North Carolina, and obviously they could get there, no question. But to me, Gonzaga's got something special, and they don't have Big Shem. But they do have my all glue guy Silas Melson, who's one of the best perimeter defenders in the country. I worry about Josh Perkins' decision making, but I mean what Killian Tilly is doing should be illegal. Yeah. What is he? 22 for his last 26, I want to say, from 3.
It's hilarious. If you talk to their staff too, as I did when I was out in Vegas, they're like, yeah, I mean, anytime that we've been out there or anytime we see him in practice, he's like a good 3-point shooter. He's not this crazy 3-point shooter. So they're like worried it's going to lay off, but until it does, man, it's hard to pick against Gonzaga.
Yeah, it sure is. And, I don't know. Obviously, nobody else really kind of jumped out at me. I'm trying to think about the rest of the bracket, some of these other teams. You feel any chance that the Penn Quakers are going to make history?
Oh, we should talk about that real quick. Yeah, I think there is a chance. I mean, they do 2 things really, really well. They shoot 3-pointers, and that can lead to more variant outcomes in games, and they defend the 3-point line really well, which is something that you have to do against the Kansas Jayhawks this year, especially with Udoka Azubuike out. If Udoka was in, there's no chance I think anyone would be picking this game, and I think he is going to play, but how healthy is he? I don't think we know that yet, right?
Well, I think ideally, I saw Bill give some interviews, including one to our selection show crew, that I think ideally he wouldn't play at all.
Yeah.
Like they would keep him out of the game. They may feel like they need him, but yeah, I mean, with that, you're right. He may not be at full health. And even if he's at full health, what kind of condition is he in? So when you get a little bit tired now, maybe you're more prone to foul trouble. And hey, listen, if it's in the second half, if it's a 12-minute mark and this thing is still a game, those Jayhawks, they're going to get a little nervous now. Start short-arming some shots. And, the only thing I'll say is this. Penn, I want to say they're 127th on KenPom. They are ranked on KenPom ahead of Wright State, which is a 13 seed. And they are ahead of 3, or maybe Wright State's a 14 seed. And they are ranked ahead of 3 15 seeds on KenPom. So, if a 16 is ever going to beat a 1, that is the team, that is the profile of a team that would pull it off. Obviously, it would be a shock by definition because we know Kansas is great. That's why they are a 1 seed. But if ever 16 was going to do it, Penn is the exact type of team that would do it.
I'm with you, Seth. Tell the people we've got coming up on the Field House this week.
Oh, we got a lot going on. I just posted my annual All Glue Team. 19 years. That's longer than you've been alive. 19th annual All Glue Team. Theo Pinson, Raleigh Alkins, Rashard Kelly, and I'm going to forget somebody. Silas Melson and Dakota Mathias are my. Of course, Isaiah Wilkins of Virginia. That's my All Glue Team. We got a great story by Ken Pomeroy. I will be picking against the spread every game in the tournament, so hopefully at some point tomorrow, certainly by Thursday morning, I'll have all my first-round picks up. I actually did pretty well in my ATS picks this year, Sam. I'm sure you appreciate that. I think I was like 7 games over 500. That's a win for me.
As long as you're around like 53, 54, you're not losing too much money.
Hey, listen, I'm just trying to get over 100, so that was and of course I'm not suggesting that anybody wager actual money on my picks. That's not the purpose of my against the spread picks. So we got people, including yourself. We got at least two writers at every site And so, we're going to have a great mix of the sort of shorter notebook items of all the interesting ins and outs of each site, and then some deeper dives with player features and team access. We're really we're going to have great access all around. So I would submit that you are not going to find any better NCAA tournament coverage anywhere on the internets than at on the Fieldhouse this week.
I totally buy into that. Seth, thanks for coming on. This has been the Fieldhouse Podcast. We'll be back later this week at some point, maybe after the first round. We'll do a quick second round preview. But until next time, we'll talk soon. Bye.